Everyone, Alistair Gold here. Tottenham finally got back to winning ways. They went to the London Stadium. They finally ended that awful away record stretching back to January, wasn't it, this year? Wow. Finally an away victory in the Premier League. And finally just a victory. I think in the Premier League it's been September, Southampton, wasn't it? I think was the last one. So that has come to an end, and obviously the very first game of Jose Mourinho's era, and he starts with a victory, which obviously is exactly how he would have wanted the day to go. I'm going to be not slightly controversial, maybe slightly divisive. If anyone's read my article that I wrote after the game as well, I'm not saying anything different to what I said right after the match, but I'm one of these people that I don't really want to go massively overboard in my praise for the Tottenham players, purely because I'm not a massive fan of a team raising their game enormously in the match after a manager's sacked. It just never sits right with me, and I think especially in this situation, this wasn't a manager that the players were desperate to get rid of, or someone that had rubbed them all up the wrong way, as you sometimes see managers come in and quite frankly the players just don't even want them there anymore. Mauricio Pochettino wasn't that kind of manager. If you watch those interviews with various players in recent days, I've watched ones with Harry Kane, Dele Alli, Ben Davies, Sonny as well. They are players that are absolutely devastated that Pochettino is not part of their everyday life. He was a guy who was a proper father figure to them, who brought on their careers enormously. And I think, unless I'm reading too much, and I don't think I am from various little bits and pieces I've heard around the club, I think there's some players who feel they let the manager down in recent months, and that's why I don't think they would want the praise particularly either. I don't think, watching the way they played against Sheffield United, the lack of creativity, lack of kind of any real desire to sometimes do what was being asked of them, and then literally 2 weeks later go to West Ham and certainly for the first hour do a lot of the very things that had been asked of them before and doing them properly. Just doesn't sit right with me massively. But that's not to do down the victory. It was a good performance, and Mourinho, I'm going to come on to him in a second, I thought he did everything absolutely spot on that needed to be done. So certainly no way is it having to go at Mourinho or the manner of the victory. I just don't want to go massively overboard, because there's this weird culture in football, isn't it, where it's always the manager's fault. The manager carries the can, the manager gets sacked. Oh look, another manager's come in and fixed everything. And football just doesn't work like that. I think the players escape a lot of blame sometimes in these scenarios, and I think a lot of them will have looked at themselves last night and said, you know what, we've gone and done the job we really could have done for that guy a few times. And as I've said in the past, before anyone that's, I know there's a lot out there that weren't massive Pochettino fans, so maybe not a lot, but a few people, and they'll always go, oh, you're giving Pochettino an easy ride. No way at all. Pochettino made mistakes, and I've referred to them in the past. I think he was probably too loyal, if anything, to these players who let him down. And yeah, I don't want to go into too much old ground, because quite frankly, as sad as it is for a lot of people, Pochettino is now no longer part of Tottenham Hotspur. He'll always be remembered for kind of what he did and the foundations he built. But right now it's a new era, and we must all move on. There'll be little things I'll go on to in the next few minutes or so, obviously, that hark back to things he's done. But essentially, it's now Jose Mourinho's time. And as I said, really impressed with what he's done so far. I think he's been really respectful, I think is probably the word to all involved. I think he's recognised it's a difficult situation for him. He's come in mid-season, which I think he said his only ever time he did that was at Porto, possibly. It was either Porto or the Portuguese club before that. He's come in and actually into a scenario where he isn't setting the agenda from the moment go. He's having to build on what's done before, and he's been very clear that what was built before was brilliant, and it's just now a case of adding the little details on top. And I felt that was kind of what he did yesterday. It was really impressively done by him. He took essentially the base of what Spurs have been doing right. He made some changes. Obviously, the team was I'm trying to think of a way to do it. It was quite a solid team. It was one that, ironically, Pochettino probably would have got a bit of flack for, because obviously we had Celso on the bench. and he went with Serge Aurier, Dyer coming into the middle with Winks. It was more a solid team than anything until that last 15 minutes, which we'll come to in a bit. But they played really well. There's lots of creativity, a lot of attacking play. It could have been 5 or 6-0, to be honest, maybe 4 or 5-0, to be very exaggerating slightly there. I know Kane and Lucas had 2 big one-on-one opportunities. They both fluffed before West Ham even started to get a sniff of coming back into it. So from that perspective, I think he did the little things like, one big criticism I'd say of Pochettino's Spurs in recent months has been that excessive overplaying of the ball from the back, dallying on the ball around the edges of the box, and essentially inviting the opposition team to come forward and get at them, which we know Spurs struggle with under pressure. It was a very strange thing. I don't know whether it was something that was actually asked for by the manager to cut out any long balls forward, or whether it was something that just literally naturally the players just kind of didn't want to give the ball away and ended up playing this really tight possession game that ended up being exploited by a lot of sides. It's one of those we probably never ever got to the bottom of. But there wasn't so much of that. At the London Stadium, there was long balls forward. Kane became more of a guy that was knocking on balls, holding the ball up well. What I would say is I don't know how long they can continue with using Kane in that role, because if you look at Mourinho's previous strikers, you had Lukaku, you had Drogba, real battering ram kind of strikers, big guys. Whereas Kane, he can do that, but I do worry if you're going to constantly use him as a battering ram, you might, with his injury record, especially the ankles, he might find that he picks up more injuries. And with Spurs not having a real backup striker, unless you're going to count Troy Parrott, that's maybe weirdly when you could have done with a Fernando Llorente, someone that's going to ease that burden every so often off him. Otherwise, if you're hammering him for 90 minutes, that might not be the best tactic for him. But I'm sure Mourinho, the one thing I think I've kind of felt from watching him close up, which is something obviously I'd only seen him in bits and pieces before, but actually kind of observing the way he operates. I say close up at the London Stadium, obviously you're getting your binoculars out, but just seeing the little tactical things and the way he talks as well, he's a very, very clever guy. You don't get to where he's got to now without being very intelligent. And I think as I said the other day, he's clearly spent the last 11 months or so really analysing what has not quite gone right and what has been right about this Tottenham Hotspur team. And you could just see the little tweaks out there. I think Dyer was always going to be a big player for him. He's chased him for years. Obviously, his Portuguese kind of childhood he spent over there and speaks fluent Portuguese. There's this kind of closeness. And I saw a Dyer interview afterwards where he was praising both Mourinho and Pochettino and saying what an amazing kind of career to have been managed by these two people, how he's fortunate he is. And I think the thing with Dyer, he's going to provide that screen in front of the back four. He was very rusty yesterday still. I think he's still very sloppy on the ball, especially first half. But once he gets back into where he was, that season when he was alongside Dembele, and he was an absolute beast really in the midfield, either in the midfield or dropping back to split the centre-backs and make a back three. If you get that Eric Dyer back, then you're going to have an incredibly effective screen in front of the back four. And defence, until that last 15 minutes, when I think it was more set-piece based, they looked very, very comfortable with what West Ham were bringing them. So it's those little things. And the other thing I thought was really respectful as well was he clapped the fans at the end, Mourinho, but he didn't go over to them. And his thinking afterwards, he said, was because he wanted the players to get all of the kind of adulation. But I also think there's an element of he knows a lot of those fans are going to be very disappointed and upset what happened with Pochettino. And I think he felt like it wasn't right just yet to go over there and kind of treat them as his own and try and, make out that he was their new man. And I thought that was pretty classy. And that's something that Mourinho obviously over the years hasn't always had a reputation for. And all of that feeds into this narrative that perhaps he's spent these 11 months being very introspective, looking at himself and, as he said in his own words, not making the same mistakes he did before. Very early days, it's his first match, and we get to see him when things are getting him down. But so far, I've been really, really impressed with the way he's handled himself. A little word as well, though, I've got to say, West Ham were awful. Honestly, was trying to rack my brains. I don't think I've seen a worse team that Tottenham have played this season. Someone suggested Newcastle to me, but Newcastle for me were defensively very organised. Steve Bruce really had them working in these kind of lines that day at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and I thought they were excellent defensively. West Ham, they were shambles all over the pitch. Literally, they only got back into the game really late on just because Spurs switched off. You know, they could have, like I say, been 4 or 5-0 up, and they switched off and just let some really sloppy goals in. But West Ham were not creating. They were not winning their battles in the midfield. And at the back, they were being torn to shreds. And I think that's going to be most worrying for the West Ham fans because this was their game. They were always up for every single year. And there was no drive like Noble. Mark Noble's normally the one who's always leading the charge. And I think he was resorting to just kind of crap late tackles on people. Like Kane, there was one where he bashed him over and it was a bit like, yeah, that's great late on in the game. But actually, that's not really going to win you matches, just going into kind of frustrated late tackles late on. Yeah, there's a lot of trouble going on there, I feel. You know, we've obviously seen how Spurs, the way they've kind of, their form dipped enormously at times, maybe longer than we kind of obviously realised this season. But West Ham, I'd be worried for Pellegrini. He came into the press conference afterwards, 2.5 minutes, if that, avoided most questions and walked out. Very, very kind of unhappy guy. I'd be stunned if he's there next month or maybe, you know, going into the Christmas period. But anyway, enough about West Ham. But I just want to kind of make it clear that while it was great that Spurs got back to winning ways, they were playing one of the worst teams they'll face this season, which is weird because they started the season really well, West Ham. But back to Spurs. Let's talk about Dele Alli. Dele Alli has been handled incredibly cleverly by Jose Mourinho this last week or so. I kind of teased it in the last video. I couldn't say, obviously, because it was an embargoed line, which means it was set for a very certain time. But Jose Mourinho told us about this, what he'd said to Dele Alli in the week. He went up to him in training and said, you've probably all read this now, so apologies if you're hearing this again, but he went up to him and said, are you Dele Alli or are you Dele Alli's brother? And Dele Alli went, I'm Dele. And he went, well, start playing like Dele, because all I've seen is a guy who must be Dele Alli's brother playing this season. And it was just that little thing. And then he said to him, because the Dele Alli I know is one of the best players in the world. And he reiterated that again after the game. He said he's just too good to not be one of the best players in the world. And hearing that, as I've said before, from Jose Mourinho, a guy who's won it all, 25 trophies to his name, that you're going to believe it. If you didn't before, you're going to believe it. And the Dele Alli we saw yesterday was brilliant. He was tired slightly towards the end, but over the first hour, 65 minutes or so, he was the Dele Alli that, you know, Spurs fans fell in love with. The one that the chant, you know, the 5 mil, the Ozil one. It's that was that Dele Alli. I know, I do know the chant. I'm just not going to say it all because it's going to sound crap on a video. But he was superb. First goal assist, obviously, played in Son. Second one, honestly, one of my favourite bits of skill of the season. I'll be shocked if anything surpasses it. Falling on his back, falling towards the touchline. The ball's about to go out of play, but he's seen Son making the run and somehow manages to do a back flick while lying on the floor. Son obviously races down, pings the ball in for Lucas Moura to slot home. It was brilliant. And Jose Mourinho said afterwards, never shy of claiming a little bit of credit in something. That was something they'd worked on in the training ground. So that's great to see something they've worked on in only 2 days or so of training come off. And he said he was asked about that moment of skill, and he was like, it was right in front of me. And Jose Mourinho, hearing him getting really excited about something at his age with everything he's seen, was really kind of infectious to see that. And he was like, you know, it was amazing. And he said it's not just about the actual movement itself. It was the thought and the confidence and the belief that he could do that. And that's what it is about Mourinho. And that's what so many players that have worked for him have said. He gives you the belief that you can achieve anything. And in doing so, the flip side is they'll run through walls for him. And having had the Pochettino era where the players did that, obviously, up until the recent months, they would do anything for him. You've kind of got a similar manager in that respect, and it's someone that's been there and done it as well on top of that. So Dele Alli, if we see him continuing to play in that way, Spurs are going to get back on track. Because quite frankly, when Dele Alli shines, Spurs do as well. He was phenomenal, and it's really exciting to see if they've got the best of him again, because I don't know if it's just me, I love him in a role behind Kane. I just think that's where he belongs. I still feel he could be a brilliant box-to-box central midfielder. I've always felt he could be a Gerrard-esque player, but quite frankly, now in his career, his best position is behind Kane, just feeding off everything. And bearing in mind there was no Eriksen or Celso in the team, I thought Ali came in and did a really impressive playmaker job, really. Everything Spurs did well yesterday pretty much came through Dele Alli. In the first probably 10-15 minutes, I think he pretty much played all three of the attacking players around him into good areas in the box. And he's a very tactically intelligent guy as well. I know he gets flack sometimes for maybe not being the brightest, but actually he's a very clever kid. I say kid, he's 23. God, that makes me sound old. But he's a bit like Dyer, and I think that's what Mourinho likes about Dyer, is that in terms of on-field intelligence, in the way they can position themselves and read the game, right up there. They really are. Third goal. Let's talk about that as well. Brilliant Kane header. He does love a London derby goal, doesn't he? Perfect cross from Aurier. Obviously someone that's got a lot of flack from myself as well this season, but that was one of the best crosses I think he's ever delivered. Superb. I think the thing with Aurier now, as always, is going to be his consistency. We've seen him do this. We've seen him have great or impressive games. I thought he defended pretty well as well on the whole, but it's about, as Pochettino said to me a few weeks back, it's about the second game, the third game, the fourth game, whether he can maintain that. And little whispers inside the club yesterday is that Kyle Walker-Peters has been told, you know, you've got a real chance as well this season, as every manager would do. It's not a revelation, you know. A new manager coming in will pretty much say to every player, this is your chance, a fresh slate, impress me, and the position will be yours. And I think it'd be interesting to see whether he gives Kyle Walker-Peters a start maybe Tuesday. Or whether it'll be Foyth or not. I do feel he'll jiggle it around a bit, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. But that's going to be refreshing for people like Walker-Peters, who was out of the squad entirely. It'd be interesting to see what happens with maybe with someone like Wanyama, because we know Mourinho likes a defensive midfielder in there, and if he feels that Wanyama is the better backup to Dyer, then he may get minutes as well, because he's just disappeared off the face of the planet. Talking of players that seem to have disappeared off the face of the planet, we have to talk about Christian Eriksen. Mourinho was very to the point with Eriksen, and I feel that's somewhere where Pochettino was lacking when he was dealing with Eriksen. I think there's the loyalty, the friendship, maybe stopped him from saying things sometimes in public that he really should have said. And Mourinho didn't beat around the bush. He came out straight away before the game and said, Eriksen's on the bench because I don't know yet whether in his heart or head what he actually wants and whether he wants to stay at Tottenham Hotspur. If I'm going to read between the lines, I think he's had a few days of dealing with the players and he will have spoken to them and he will have got an impression of whether Eriksen wants to stay at the club. Various reporters in Denmark are saying that Eriksen has decided he doesn't even want to wait to the end of his contract. He wants to leave Spurs in January. And if that's the case, that would maybe link in with the decision to kind of bench him yesterday. Although, to be honest, he wasn't starting matches anyway under Pochettino. And if that's the case, probably for all parties, it's just best to part ways in January because Eriksen came on and he just delivered exactly the same performance we've seen so many times this season. Disinterested, lack of any real ambition to do much with the ball. Barely impacted the game. And if you want to be ultra kind of harsh, maybe, if it is, maybe Spurs started to go downhill maybe when he was on the pitch. Him and Danny Rose came on, and I don't want to dig out Danny Rose too much because he did make a really good tackle at one point which stopped a West Ham attack, but Spurs started to go a little bit downhill when those two guys came on the pitch, and it may just be a coincidence. I don't want to dig them out too much, but certainly with Eriksen, it's just a shadow of the player, absolute shadow of the player that Tottenham had for so many years, who was one of the best in the Premier League. And if even Mourinho is doubting where his heart's at, it's probably time, isn't it, to just kind of call it a day. The issue comes, obviously, is if Eriksen is not going to be part of this team, Giovani Lo Celso obviously was the natural replacement for him, and it's going to be interesting to see now, obviously, he was unused in the first game, and I just I'm hoping it just purely was because he's still trying to get a little sense of him, but I just hope that he's not seen as a Pochettino purchase. Obviously, fellow Argentine, a player that Pochettino kind of pushed for. And obviously he's on loan, he's not permanent at this moment in time. I just hope that that's not a feeling that, oh, this guy's a previous regime purchase and might not fit in, and maybe a bit like, I think Mata was one, wasn't he? That Mourinho had issues with at Chelsea, and then when he came to Man U, I think Lo Celso's different. I think Lo Celso is a tigerish, aggressive presser of the ball as well. I think he's much more than just a luxury playmaker type, and I hope that it was just a one-off. I'm maybe reading far too much into it, and we may see he plays against Olympiacos on Tuesday night and absolutely smashes it and becomes very quickly an integral part of a Mourinho team. Obviously, there's another one with Sessegnon wasn't involved at all. I think with him, maybe it was just because the bench was so stocked. Obviously, you had Sissoko, Lo Celso, Eriksen on there. Perhaps that's just the reason for that, because I'd hate to see his kind of development stagnate as well. We know the issues in the past with youth and Mourinho. He obviously has said in recent days it's all about the quality you've got available to you, and Sessegnon is top quality. He is such a talented young player, and hopefully we'll see, Tuesday night. I think a lot of them, for me, I think Tuesday night is going to be almost like a bit of a trial game maybe. This one against West Ham was Mourinho looking at players that he knew quite well and he knew would probably do the job for him at West Ham. Tuesday night maybe is going to be everyone else. He may completely turn that on his head and decide that he wants momentum and play the same team, but I'd be surprised. I think this one will be more a chance for him to look at other players. It's a game that Spurs really should win. Olympiacos haven't won a single game yet in the group, and Spurs should really at home be thinking, even with a complete change team, they should be doing the job. And I think he's going to get to know a few of those players a little bit better after Tuesday night. Davies looked like he was injured. Didn't get a chance to ask about that after the match. We'll find out tomorrow. Tomorrow's a busy one. I've got open training in the morning at Hotspur Way, and then in the afternoon, Mourinho's press conference with a player who we don't know who that player is quite yet. But yeah, it's tomorrow. Tuesday night is going to be probably as interesting a little look at what Mourinho's thinking as the West Ham game was. Like I said, it's almost like trial number 2. And we'll see a little bit more about the way he wants to play and the way he'll want to play in Europe. And then number 3, Bournemouth at home next weekend, will be an amalgamation of where he's at with the group of players. So yeah, all eyes on the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Tuesday night, and hopefully another victory and get some real momentum going with Tottenham Hotspur. And obviously the past is the past. Really great things happened in the last 5.5 years with Mauricio Pochettino and his team. But now it's a new era, and hopefully it leads Tottenham onto even higher levels. I shall catch you later in the week.